The coffee was scalding hot, bitter, and exactly what Zoe Chen needed after 47 hours of no sleep. She stood in the cramped break room of Morrison and Associates Architecture, her worn sneakers a stark contrast to the polished marble floors, clutching a mug that said "World's Okayest Architect," a gag gift from her best friend that felt increasingly accurate. Her eyes were bloodshot, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun held together by a mechanical pencil, and her oversized cardigan was spotted with ink stains from the all-nighter she'd just pulled. The annual Bennett Tower Design Competition results were being announced today. 3 years. 3 years of pouring her soul into a revolutionary sustainable skyscraper design that could change urban architecture forever. 3 years of being overlooked, underpaid, and underestimated as a junior architect in a firm that treated her like an overeducated intern. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her roommate and fellow architect, Maya. "Did you see the news? Morrison sold the firm. Emergency, all hands meeting in 20 minutes. WTF is happening." Zoe's stomach dropped. The coffee suddenly tasted like ashes. Sold? The firm had been in the Morrison family for 3 generations. Mr. Morrison, the silver-haired patriarch who had hired her straight out of grad school, had promised her that her competition entry would be submitted under the firm's name with full credit to her as lead designer. It was her golden ticket, her chance to finally be seen. She pulled up the news on her phone, and the headline made her blood run cold. Tech billionaire Dominic Kane acquires historic Morrison and Associates in surprise deal. Plans, complete restructuring. The photo showed a man in his early 30s, devastatingly handsome in the way that powerful men always seem to be, with sharp cheekbones, dark hair styled with careless perfection, and eyes the color of a winter storm. He was stepping out of a black SUV, his expression one of cool, dismissive confidence. The caption read, "Kane, 32, made his fortune in AI-driven real estate development and is known for his aggressive cost-cutting tactics and zero-tolerance policy for inefficiency." "Great," Zoe muttered to herself, her heart sinking. "A corporate raider who probably thinks architecture is just about profit margins and square footage." She had 20 minutes. 20 minutes before her entire world potentially collapsed. She grabbed her leather portfolio, the one her late father had given her when she'd been accepted to Columbia's architecture program, and headed toward the main conference room. The hallways were buzzing with panicked whispers. Senior architects huddled in corners, their faces pale. Assistants frantically updated their LinkedIn profiles on their phones. The conference room was already packed when she arrived. Zoe found a spot standing against the back wall, next to Maya, who grabbed her hand and squeezed it tight. "This is bad," Maya whispered. "I heard he's shutting down half the firm." Before Zoe could respond, the doors at the front of the room opened. Mr. Morrison walked in first, his usually proud shoulders slumped in defeat, and behind him was the man from the photograph. Dominic Kane. In person, he was even more intimidating than his pictures suggested. He moved with the predatory grace of someone who had never been told no in his life. His suit was impeccably tailored, probably custom Savile Row, and fit him like a weapon. But it was his eyes that made Zoe's breath catch, cold, calculating, and sweeping across the room as if he were already calculating who was an asset and who was a liability. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat, his voice shaking. "I want to thank you all for your years of dedication to Morrison and Associates. As of this morning, I've sold the firm to Mr. Kane. I'm confident that under his leadership—" "Thank you, James," Dominic interrupted smoothly, stepping forward. His voice was a low, commanding baritone that instantly silenced the room. "Let me be direct because I don't believe in wasting time. Morrison and Associates has been hemorrhaging money for the past 3 years. Outdated practices, bloated staff, and projects that prioritize artistic vision over profitability." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Zoe felt her blood beginning to boil. Artistic vision over profitability? That was the entire point of architecture, to create something that mattered, something that elevated the human experience. Over the next 6 weeks, Dominic continued, his gaze never wavering, I will be conducting a comprehensive review of every project, every architect, and every contract. Only those who can prove their value to the new direction of this firm will remain. The rest, he paused, his expression utterly impassive, will be let go. The room erupted into chaos. People shouted questions, others started crying. Zoe stood frozen, her mind racing. 6 weeks. She had 6 weeks to prove her worth to a man who clearly saw architecture as nothing more than a commodity. That's insane. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward her. Maya grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back, but Zoe stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. You're saying that 3 generations of architectural excellence, of designs that have won awards and changed skylines, means nothing because the profit margins aren't high enough for you. Dominic's gaze locked onto hers. For the first time since entering the room, something flickered in those cold eyes. Interest, or maybe irritation. It was impossible to tell. And you are, his tone was clipped dismissive. Zoe Chen, junior architect, and someone who actually cares about the work we do here, not just the bottom line. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but there was no warmth in it. Ms. Chen, tell me, how long have you been a junior architect? The emphasis on the word was deliberate, designed to diminish her. Zoe felt her cheeks flush. 3 years. 3 years and still junior, that's quite telling. He took a step closer, and Zoe could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, like vetiver and cedar. And in those 3 years, how much revenue have you personally generated for this firm? She opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth was, junior architects didn't generate revenue. They supported senior architects, did the grunt work, and hoped for a chance to shine. That's what I thought, Dominic said, his voice dripping with condescension. Passion is admirable, Ms. Chen, but this is a business, and businesses require results, not idealism. The dismissal was so complete, so arrogant, that Zoe felt something inside her snap. You know what? You're right. I haven't generated revenue because people like you never give people like me the chance. But I've got more talent in my sleep-deprived, coffee-stained, pinky finger than you have in your entire overpriced suit. The room was so quiet you could hear the HVAC system humming. Maya had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Mr. Morrison looked like he might faint. Dominic stared at her for a long, dangerous moment. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, completely devoid of humor. Noted, Ms. Chen. He turned back to address the room. As I was saying, 6 weeks, prove your value or find other employment. This meeting is over. He walked out without another glance, Mr. Morrison trailing behind him like a ghost. The moment the door closed, the room exploded into frantic conversation. Zoe stood frozen, the adrenaline draining from her body, leaving her shaky and nauseated. What had she just done? She'd called the new owner of her firm arrogant to his face. She'd insulted his suit. She'd essentially committed career suicide. Zoe, Maya said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. You just told a billionaire he has no talent. I know, Zoe whispered, sinking into the nearest chair. I know. Her phone buzzed, an email from Dominic Kane. Subject, your 6 weeks start now. Ms. Chen, since you're so confident in your abilities, I'm giving you an opportunity. You have 6 weeks to present me with a project that proves your value to this firm. Not a concept, not a dream. A real, profitable, innovative project that can be executed within budget and timeline. If you fail, you're the first one out the door. If you succeed, we'll talk. DK. Zoe stared at the email, her hands trembling. It wasn't a reprieve. It was a challenge, a trap most likely, but it was also the only chance she had. She looked up at Maya, who was reading over her shoulder. "What are you going to do?" Zoe thought about the Bennett Tower competition, about her design that could revolutionize sustainable architecture, about the 3 years she'd spent being invisible. "I'm going to make him eat his words," she said quietly, "and his overpriced suit." The next morning, Zoe arrived at the office at 5:47 a.m., determined to get a head start. The building was almost empty, just the cleaning crew and a few workaholics already at their desks. She made her way to her tiny cubicle in the junior architect's bullpen, a glorified closet with flickering fluorescent lights and a view of the mechanical room. She had spent the entire night researching Dominic Kane. The man was a phenomenon in the real estate development world. At 26, he'd created an AI algorithm that could predict property value appreciation with 94% accuracy. By 28, he'd built his first skyscraper using revolutionary construction techniques that cut costs by 40% without sacrificing structural integrity. By 30, he owned a portfolio worth $8.3 billion. But the more she read, the more she saw a pattern. Every building he developed was efficient, profitable, and utterly soulless. Glass and steel boxes designed to maximize rentable square footage. They were architectural fast food, quick, cheap, and forgettable. "He doesn't understand beauty," Zoe muttered to herself as she pulled up her Bennett Tower designs. "He only understands numbers." "Is that what you think of me?" Zoe's heart stopped. She spun around in her chair to find Dominic Kane standing right behind her, a cup of coffee in each hand. He was dressed more casually today, dark jeans, a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and somehow looking even more devastating than he had in the suit. "What are you doing here?" she blurted out. "I own the building," he replied, his tone dry. "I'm allowed to be here." He held out one of the coffee cups. "Peace offering, black, 2 sugars. Your assistant mentioned it's how you take it." "I don't have an assistant," Zoe said suspiciously, not taking the coffee. "You do now. I promoted Maya Torres. She starts today." He placed the coffee on her desk. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill. You're going to need all the help you can get." Zoe stared at the coffee like it might be poisoned. "Why are you really here?" Dominic leaned against her cubicle wall, his presence making the already small space feel claustrophobic. "Curiosity. Yesterday you called me arrogant. Today I want to see if you have the skills to back up that mouth." "It wasn't just talk," Zoe shot back, her defenses rising. "I have a design that could change everything. A sustainable skyscraper that generates more energy than it consumes, with a modular construction system that reduces building time by 60%. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest, real interest. "Show me." Zoe hesitated. This was her baby, her masterpiece, and she was about to show it to a man who valued profit over everything else. But she didn't have a choice. She pulled up the 3D rendering on her monitor. The design was breathtaking. A twisting tower that captured wind energy through integrated turbines, with a facade made of photovoltaic glass that absorbed solar power. The interior featured vertical gardens that naturally cooled the building, and a rainwater collection system that recycled every drop. It was ambitious, revolutionary, and absolutely beautiful. Dominic was silent for a long moment, studying the screen. Then he did something that shocked her. He sat down in the guest chair, the rickety one that barely fit in her cubicle, and leaned forward. "Talk me through the engineering," he said, his voice no longer dismissive but sharp with focus. For the next hour, Zoe explained every detail: the structural calculations, the material sourcing, the construction timeline. And Dominic listened, not like a CEO humoring an employee, but like someone who genuinely understood the complexity of what she'd created. When she finished, he sat back, his expression unreadable. "This is good," he finally said. "Better than good. It's exactly the kind of innovation the industry needs." Zoe's heart soared. So you'll support it, you'll let me develop it. No. The word landed like a punch. What, why not? Because it's too expensive, too risky, and no developer in their right mind would commission it. You're a brilliant designer, Ms. Chen, but you're thinking like an artist, not a businesswoman. He stood up. If you want to prove your value to me, you need to create something that's both innovative and profitable. Beauty that makes money. Can you do that? It was a direct challenge, and as much as she hated to admit it, he had a point. Her design was revolutionary, but it was also a financial gamble. No developer wanted to be the first to take that risk. Give me a week, she said, her mind already racing. I'll show you something that checks all your boxes. 3 days, Dominic countered. And Ms. Chen? He paused at the entrance to her cubicle. For what it's worth, your design is the most impressive thing I've seen come out of this firm in years. You're wasted in this cubicle. He left before she could respond, leaving her staring at his retreating back, her emotions a tangled mess of frustration, validation, and something else she didn't want to examine too closely. Meyer appeared moments later, practically vibrating with excitement. Oh my God, Zoe, I have an office, an actual office with a door and everything. And he said I'm your assistant now, which means, wait, why do you look like you just got hit by a truck? Because I have 3 days to redesign my entire project to make it profitable without compromising the sustainability features. And if I fail, I'm fired, Zoe said, dropping her head onto her desk. No pressure. 72 hours. That's all Zoe had. She didn't go home. She barely ate. She lived on coffee, determination, and the growing suspicion that Dominic Kane was deliberately trying to break her. On the second night at 11:47 p.m., she was alone in the office, surrounded by crumpled sketches and empty energy drink cans, when she heard footsteps. She looked up to find Dominic standing in the doorway of the conference room she'd commandeered as her war room. Don't you have a mansion to be in? She asked, too exhausted for politeness. Don't you have a home to go to? He countered, stepping inside. He was dressed down again in jeans and a simple black t-shirt that shouldn't have looked as good as it did. It's almost midnight. I'm aware I have less than 24 hours to finish this. She gestured at the chaos around her. Some of us don't have the luxury of failure. He walked over to her drafting table, studying her latest iteration. She'd found a compromise, incorporating her sustainable features in a phased approach that reduced initial costs while maintaining the building's innovative core. It wasn't as ambitious as her original design, but it was smarter, strategic. This is good, Dominic said, a note of surprise in his voice. You found a way to make it work. Did you think I could? Zoe challenged, standing up to face him. Even exhausted and rumpled, she refused to back down. I thought you'd try to convince me that profit didn't matter, he admitted. That you'd give me the same design with a lecture about artistic integrity. I'm not an idiot, Zoe said sharply. I know money matters. I've been broke my entire adult life, but I refuse to believe that we have to choose between profit and doing something meaningful. Why can't we have both? Dominic was quiet for a moment, his expression difficult to read. Then he did something completely unexpected. He sat down on the edge of her drafting table and loosened his shoulders, suddenly looking less like an intimidating billionaire and more like a tired man. Can I tell you something? He asked, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. That feels like a trap, Zoe said warily, but she sat down across from him. My first building was beautiful, Dominic said, staring at his hands. I was 26, fresh out of grad school with more money than sense. I designed a mixed-use development with community spaces, affordable housing, and public art installations. It was going to be my legacy. What happened? Zoe asked, her curiosity overriding her wariness. It bankrupted my first company. The construction went over budget by 300%. Contractors cut corners to try to save money, and the structural integrity was compromised. I had to tear down half of it before anyone could move in. He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his eyes. 17 families had put down deposits on those affordable units. They lost everything because I was more concerned with creating art than creating something sustainable. Zoe felt her anger softening despite herself. So you went to the other extreme, all profit, no soul. I built things that lasted, that worked, that didn't destroy people's lives. He stood up, the moment of vulnerability closing. I don't need you to like me, Ms. Chen, but I need you to understand that my approach isn't about not caring, it's about not making the same mistake twice. Before Zoe could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression hardened. I have to take this. You should go home, get some sleep before tomorrow. Who says I need sleep? Zoe challenged, but he was already walking away, the phone pressed to his ear, his voice dropping to a tone too low for her to hear. She watched him disappear down the hallway, her mind reeling. Dominic Kane wasn't the heartless corporate raider she'd assumed. He was someone carrying a failure so heavy it had fundamentally changed how he saw the world. And somehow that made him more dangerous, because it meant he wasn't just arrogant, he was human. The conference room was packed. Dominic had invited not just the senior architects from Morrison and Associates, but also 3 potential development clients and a journalist from Architectural Digest. He'd turned Zoe's private evaluation into a public trial. She stood at the front of the room in her best professional outfit, a navy blazer that had seen better days and her lucky heels that pinched her toes, and tried not to throw up from nerves. Maya gave her an encouraging thumbs up from the back row. Dominic sat in the center of the front row, his expression unreadable. Next to him was a woman Zoe didn't recognize, stunning, in her early 30s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a designer suit that screamed old money. She leaned over and whispered something in Dominic's ear, her hand resting casually on his arm. He nodded, his attention never leaving Zoe. Ms. Chen, Dominic said, his voice cutting through her spiraling thoughts. Whenever you're ready. Zoe took a deep breath and clicked to her first slide. 3 days ago, I was challenged to create a design that balanced innovation with profitability. What I'm about to show you is a sustainable skyscraper that can be built within standard construction budgets while reducing operational costs by 40% over a traditional building's lifetime. For the next 30 minutes, she presented her revised design. She showed how the modular construction system could be manufactured off-site, reducing labor costs and construction time. She explained how the photovoltaic glass paid for itself within 7 years through energy generation. She had cost breakdowns, timeline projections, and case studies from similar projects around the world. It was brilliant, and she knew it. When she finished, the room was silent for a long, agonizing moment. Then one of the potential clients, a developer named Robert Chen, no relation, who specialized in luxury residential towers, stood up and started clapping. That was exceptional, he said, looking directly at Dominic. If Morrison and Associates can deliver this, I want to commission the first building. I'm developing a site in Brooklyn that would be perfect. The room erupted into conversation. Other clients were nodding, leaning forward, asking questions. The journalist was scribbling notes frantically. Zoe felt a wave of validation so powerful she had to grip the podium to stay steady. But Dominic's expression hadn't changed. He simply stood up, buttoned his jacket, and addressed the room. Thank you all for attending. If you're interested in discussing Ms. Chen's design further, my assistant will coordinate meetings. Then he looked directly at Zoe. Ms. Chen, my office now. The triumph drained from her body, replaced by icy dread. The blonde woman stood as well, falling into step beside Dominic as they exited. Zoe followed, her heart pounding as they walked through the hallways toward the executive floor, a part of the building she'd never been to. Dominic's office was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the space was furnished with mid-century modern pieces that probably belonged in a museum. But Zoe barely noticed because the blonde woman was leaning against Dominic's desk, studying Zoe with cool, appraising eyes. "Impressive presentation," the woman said, her tone making it clear she didn't find it impressive at all. "Though I have to wonder if you've considered the liability issues with such experimental materials." "I'm sorry," Zoe said, her defenses rising. "Who are you?" "Victoria Ashford. I'm Dominic's chief operating officer and his fiancée." The word landed like a bomb. Fiancé. Zoe's eyes darted to Dominic, looking for confirmation. He met her gaze but said nothing, his expression carved from stone. "The design is solid," Dominic said, his voice clipped and professional. "You completed the assignment. Consider yourself off probation." "Off probation," Zoe repeated, anger flaring. "I just brought you a multi-million-dollar client and your response is, consider yourself off probation." "Would you prefer I throw you a parade?" Dominic shot back, his cool facade cracking slightly. "You did your job, Ms. Chen. That's what I'm paying you for." "My job? You set me up to fail. You gave me 72 hours to do something that should have taken weeks. You turned it into a public spectacle, and now you're acting like I barely met the minimum requirements." "Zoe," Dominic started, but Victoria cut him off. "Dominic, darling, we have the mayor's office on hold," Victoria interjected smoothly, placing a possessive hand on his arm. "Some of us have real work to do." The dismissal was so complete, so condescending, that Zoe felt her vision blur with rage. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "You know what?" Zoe said, her voice shaking but steady. "You were right, Mr. Kane. You are arrogant, but you're also a coward. You hide behind balance sheets and profit margins because you're too afraid to create something that actually matters. My mistake was thinking you were capable of seeing the difference." She turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her with enough force to rattle the frame. Behind the closed door, silence reigned. Then Victoria spoke, her voice dripping with amusement. "Well, she certainly has spirit. Is she always this dramatic?" Dominic didn't answer. He was staring at the door Zoe had just exited through, his jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "Dominic," Victoria prompted. "We're not engaged, Victoria," he said quietly, his voice dangerous. "We dated for 3 months 2 years ago. Stop telling people we're engaged." Victoria's perfect smile faltered. "Darling, I was joking. Can't you take a joke?" "Get out," Dominic said, turning to face her. The look in his eyes was pure ice. "And if you ever undermine one of my architects in front of me again, you're fired." Victoria stared at him, shock and fury warring on her face. Then she grabbed her designer handbag and stalked out, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Alone in his office, Dominic sank into his chair and ran a hand through his hair. He'd handled that spectacularly badly. Zoe had just given him exactly what he'd asked for, brilliance tempered with business sense, and he'd treated her like an inconvenience. Because if he'd been honest, if he'd told her that her presentation had been the most impressive thing he'd seen in years, if he'd admitted that watching her command that room had made him want to kiss her, until neither of them could breathe, then he'd have to acknowledge that she'd gotten under his skin in a way no one had in years. And Dominic Kane didn't do vulnerability, not anymore. Zoe spent the weekend nursing her wounded pride and ignoring the 14 emails from Maya begging her to come back to the office. On Monday morning, she seriously considered quitting. She could freelance. She could teach. She could do literally anything other than work for a man who made her want to simultaneously punch him, and no, she wasn't going there. She was pouring her third cup of coffee when Maya burst through her apartment door. They exchanged keys months ago, a decision Zoe was now regretting. "You need to come to the office right now," Maya said, breathless. "Absolutely not," Zoe replied, not looking up from her coffee. "Zoe, they're announcing the Bennett Tower competition results today, and I heard something you need to know." That got her attention. The Bennett Tower. In all the chaos with Dominic, she'd almost forgotten about the competition. Morrison had submitted her design 3 months ago. The winner got a $200,000 prize and, more importantly, the commission to build it, a career-making opportunity. "What did you hear?" Zoe asked, her stomach sinking. Maya's expression turned grim. "I think Morrison submitted your design under his own name." The coffee mug slipped from Zoe's hands, shattering on the floor. She didn't even notice. "What?" "I was doing filing for Dominic, God. That man generates more paperwork than a small country. And I found the original competition submission. Your design. With James Morrison listed as the principal architect and you buried in the credits as a junior design assistant." The betrayal was a physical pain in Zoe's chest. Morrison had promised her. He looked her in the eye and promised that this would be her project, her name, her future. "Where's the announcement?" Zoe asked, already grabbing her jacket. "The New York Public Library, main branch. It starts in 45 minutes. They ran. The library's main reading room was transformed into an elegant presentation space, filled with the architecture world's elite. Zoe and Maya slipped in through a side entrance, staying in the back where they wouldn't be noticed. On stage, the competition chairman, a distinguished architect named Harold Preston, was making the announcement. And the winner of this year's Bennett Tower International Design Competition is Morrison and Associates for their revolutionary sustainable skyscraper designed by principal architect James Morrison. The room erupted into applause. Zoe watched, numb, as Morrison walked up to the stage, his practiced smile in place, and accepted the award. He gave a speech about vision and legacy and the future of architecture, and he never once mentioned her name. "Zoe," Maya whispered, grabbing her arm. "Look." Dominic Kane was standing near the front of the room, and he wasn't clapping. He was staring at Morrison with an expression of dawning realization, his jaw clenched. Their eyes met across the crowded room. In that moment, something passed between them, understanding and fury. Before Zoe could process what was happening, Dominic was moving. He strode up to the stage, his presence commanding immediate attention. The applause died down, replaced by confused murmurs. "Excuse me," Dominic said, his voice carrying across the room. "I believe there's been a mistake." Morrison's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kane, but this isn't the time for—" "That design wasn't created by James Morrison," Dominic interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. "It was created by Zoe Chen, a junior architect at Morrison and Associates, and I can prove it." The room exploded into chaos. Reporters surged forward, cameras started flashing. Morrison's face went white, then red. "That's absurd," Morrison sputtered. "Ms. Chen worked on the project, yes, but under my supervision." "Really?" Dominic pulled out his phone, his movements precise and controlled. "Because I have the metadata from the original design files. Every sketch, every calculation, every revision was done by Ms. Chen. Your name doesn't appear in the file history once." He projected the evidence onto the screen behind Morrison, timestamps, file histories, even email chains showing Zoe's solo work on the project. It was damning, irrefutable. "Ms. Chen," Dominic called out, his eyes finding hers in the crowd. "Would you like to come up here and explain your design, since you're the one who actually created it?" Zoe's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear. She looked at Maya, who gave her a fierce nod. Then she walked down the aisle, every eye in the room on her, and climbed onto the stage. She stood next to Dominic, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, to see the barely controlled rage simmering beneath his collected exterior, and faced the audience. "My name is Zoe Chen," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And everything Mr. Kane just said is true. I designed the Bennett Tower, every line, every innovation, every sustainable feature. Mr. Morrison submitted it under his name without my knowledge or consent. Morrison tried to interrupt, but the competition chairman held up a hand. Mr. Morrison, is this true? Morrison's face crumbled. In that moment, he aged a decade. The firm needed the recognition. We were being sold, I thought. You thought you could steal your employees' work, Dominic finished coldly. You're right about one thing, James. Morrison and Associates did need recognition, but not from fraud. The chairman turned to Zoe, his expression grave but respectful. Ms. Chen, based on this evidence, the award is rightfully yours. Do you accept? Zoe looked at the trophy Morrison was still clutching, at the faces of the industry leaders watching her, at the future that was suddenly, impossibly within reach. I accept. The room erupted into applause, real applause this time. Morrison was escorted off the stage by security, his career in ruins. And Zoe stood there, holding an award she'd dreamed about for years, trying not to cry from the overwhelming relief and vindication. Dominic leaned in close, his mouth near her ear. In the chaos of the moment, it looked like he was congratulating her, but his words were for her alone. You were right. I was a coward, but not anymore. Before she could ask what he meant, he stepped back and addressed the room. I'm pleased to announce that Kane Development will be partnering with Ms. Chen to build the first Bennett Tower, and she'll be doing it as the lead architect of her own firm, Chen and Associates. The paperwork will be finalized by the end of the week. Zoe's jaw dropped. Her own firm? Wait, what? But Dominic was already walking off the stage, leaving her standing in the spotlight, her mind reeling from the whiplash of the last 30 minutes. Meyer appeared beside her, tears streaming down her face. Zoe, oh my God, you did it. You actually did it. But Zoe wasn't thinking about the award or the firm or even the building. She was watching Dominic's retreating back, trying to understand why he just handed her everything she'd ever wanted. And why it felt like this was only the beginning. The aftermath of the Bennett Tower scandal was swift and brutal. By Monday morning, Morrison had been forced to resign in disgrace, his reputation in tatters. The architectural community was in an uproar, some supporting Zoe, others whispering that she must have manipulated Dominic Kane somehow. Because how else could a junior architect end up with her own firm and a billionaire backer overnight? Zoe sat in a conference room on the executive floor, the same one where she'd presented just days ago, waiting for Dominic to arrive. The contract for Chen and Associates sat on the table in front of her, but she hadn't signed it yet, because something felt wrong. The door opened and Dominic walked in, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. He looked tired, Zoe realized. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. You didn't sign the contract, he observed, sitting down across from her. Because I need to understand what you're doing, Zoe said bluntly. Why did you help me? You barely tolerated me a week ago. You called me a liability, and now you're funding my entire firm. I'm investing in talent, Dominic replied, his tone carefully neutral. Your design is going to make us both a fortune. It's smart business. Bullshit. His eyebrows rose. Excuse me. I've done my research, Mr. Kane. You're a brilliant investor. You don't make emotional decisions. You don't charge onto stages and publicly humiliate your former employees to defend junior architects you supposedly barely know. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. So I'll ask again, why did you do it? For a long moment, Dominic was silent. Then he did something completely unexpected. He reached across the table and turned the contract to the last page, pointing to a clause near the bottom. Read Section 7, he said quietly. Zoe pulled the document closer, her eyes scanning the legal text. When she found Section 7, her breath caught. Section 7, Personal Conduct Clause. In consideration for the funding and support provided by Kane Development, the principal architect, Zoe Chen, agrees to the following condition. She will accompany Dominic Kane to a minimum of 6 social and business events over the next 3 months in the capacity of his professional partner and date. This arrangement is designed to publicly demonstrate Kane Development's commitment to emerging architectural talent and to provide the principal architect with networking opportunities essential to her firm's success. Failure to fulfill this obligation will result in the immediate termination of this contract and the return of all funding provided. Zoe read it twice, then looked up at Dominic, her expression a mixture of confusion and fury. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" "Not my girlfriend, my date to professional events. There's a difference." "Is there?" Zoe shot back. "Because this sure sounds like you're buying my company for the price of arm candy." Dominic's jaw tightened. "That's not what this is." "Then explain it to me, because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a really expensive way to get dates." "I don't need help getting dates," Dominic snapped, his composure finally cracking. He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You know what Victoria said at the presentation about being my fiancé?" "Yes, and you said you weren't engaged." "We're not. We dated briefly 2 years ago. But Victoria has connections, and she's been telling people we're getting back together. My investors, my board, everyone. And because I've been so focused on work, I haven't bothered to publicly contradict her." "So this is about your ex-girlfriend?" Zoe asked, still not understanding. "It's about control," Dominic corrected. "Victoria is trying to position herself as my partner personally and professionally. If I show up to events with you, someone I actually respect, someone who represents the future of this company rather than its old money past, it sends a message. That I'm a prop in your corporate drama. That you're a brilliant architect who deserves to be seen," Dominic countered, his voice intense. "Yes, it helps me, but it helps you too. Do you know how many doors will open for you if you're seen as my professional equal? How many clients will want to work with Chen and Associates if they think you have my ear?" He wasn't wrong. The architecture world was still an old boys' club. Being associated with Dominic Kane would give her instant credibility. 6 events, Zoe said slowly, in 3 months. 6 events, and I'll provide your wardrobe, transportation, everything. You just have to show up and be yourself. And if people think we're actually dating, we let them think it, Dominic said, his gaze steady. It benefits us both. When the 3 months are over, we part as professional colleagues, you keep your firm, I move forward without Victoria's interference, and everyone wins. It was manipulative, calculated, and exactly the kind of arrangement she should refuse. But it was also the opportunity of a lifetime. Her own firm, funding for her dream project, and the connections to make Chen and Associates a success. "I have conditions," Zoe said, grabbing a pen. "Of course you do," Dominic replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "First, my firm stays autonomous. You don't get creative control over my designs. Second, Maya comes with me as my COO. Third, at these events, you actually introduce me as an architect, not just your date. I'm not arm candy." "Agreed to all 3, Dominic said immediately. "Anything else?" Zoe hesitated, then added one more line to the contract. "And if either of us develops real feelings, we tell the other immediately and renegotiate. I won't be someone's secret." Dominic's expression flickered, surprise, maybe, or something deeper she couldn't name. "That's fair." Zoe signed the contract, her hand steady despite the voice in her head screaming that this was a terrible idea. She slid it across the table to Dominic, who signed his own name with a flourish. "Welcome to Kane Development, Ms. Chen," he said, extending his hand. Zoe shook it, his grip warm and firm. "Don't make me regret this, Mr. Kane." "I could say the same to you," he replied. As she left the conference room, contract in hand, Zoe tried to ignore the flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with professional excitement and everything to do with the way Dominic had looked at her when he said, "Someone I actually respect." This was a business arrangement, that's all it was. She just needed to keep reminding herself of that. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's annual gala was the social event of the season. Zoe stood in front of the floor-length mirror in her tiny apartment, barely recognizing herself. The dress Dominic had sent over was a deep emerald silk that draped elegantly across her body, with a subtle slit up one leg and a neckline that was sophisticated without being revealing. It probably cost more than her monthly rent. Her hair had been professionally styled into soft waves, and a makeup artist had done something magical that made her eyes look huge and mysterious. "You look like a princess," Maya said, standing in the doorway with tears in her eyes. "A badass architect princess who's about to walk into a room full of snobs and blow their minds. Or trip in these heels and fall flat on my face," Zoe muttered, staring down at the stilettos that added 4 inches to her height. "Nope, not allowed. You're Zoe Chen, award-winning architect and owner of your own firm. You belong there just as much as any of them." A knock at the door made them both jump. Maya opened it to reveal Dominic, and for a moment Zoe forgot how to breathe. He was devastating in a custom tuxedo that fit him like it had been painted on. His dark hair was styled perfectly, and his eyes, those impossible eyes, swept over her with an intensity that made her skin heat. "You look," Dominic trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. "Perfect, you look perfect." "It's the dress," Zoe said quickly, trying to ignore the way her heart was hammering. "And the professional hair and makeup team you sent. I clean up okay with enough help." "It's not the dress," Dominic said quietly, stepping into the apartment. He pulled a velvet box from his jacket pocket. "But this will complete the look." Inside was a stunning necklace, a delicate platinum chain with an emerald pendant that matched her dress exactly. It was beautiful and clearly expensive, and Zoe immediately shook her head. "I can't wear that if I lose it." "It's insured," Dominic interrupted, "and it's on loan from Cartier. You're doing them a favor by wearing it to a high-profile event." He held out the necklace. "May I?" Zoe nodded, not trusting her voice. She turned around and Dominic stepped behind her, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp. The touch was brief, professional, but it sent electricity down her spine. "There," Dominic said, his voice lower than before. "Now you're ready." In the limo ride to the museum, Dominic briefed her on the guests they'd encounter. "Robert Preston will be there. He's on the Bennett committee and wants to meet you officially. So will Alina van der Berg, who owns half the museums in the city and commissions a new building every other year. And unfortunately, Victoria will also be there." "You're not fiancé," Zoe said. "My persistent ex who doesn't understand the meaning of no," Dominic corrected with a grimace. "She's going to make this difficult. Just stay close to me, and if she says anything, don't engage. That's what she wants." The museum was transformed into a glittering wonderland. The main hall was filled with Manhattan's elite, old money mingling with new, celebrities rubbing shoulders with business tycoons. Zoe felt completely out of her depth until Dominic placed a hand on the small of her back, the gesture both possessive and reassuring. "Remember," he murmured near her ear, "you belong here, you've earned it." For the first hour it was magical. Dominic introduced her to everyone who mattered, always with the same phrase. "This is Zoe Chen, the architect who designed the Bennett Tower. She's going to change the industry." People listened. They asked questions. They gave her their cards. Robert Preston cornered her by the bar and spent 20 minutes discussing her sustainable design features, ending with, "My company is developing a campus in Austin. I want Chen and Associates to design it. Let's schedule a meeting next week." Zoe floated back to Dominic's side, her heart soaring. "Did that just happen? Did I just get a commission worth millions?" "Yes," Dominic said, his eyes crinkling with genuine pleasure. "And it's only the beginning. You're the most interesting person in this room, Zoe. People are going to want to work with you. Mr. Kane, how unexpected to see you here. The voice was silk and venom. Zoe turned to find Victoria Ashford standing behind them, resplendent in a white gown that probably cost more than Zoe's entire apartment. Her eyes swept over Zoe with barely concealed disdain. Victoria, Dominic said coolly, always a pleasure. Is it? Victoria's gaze fixed on Zoe. And you must be the junior architect I've heard so much about. Zoe, was it? Congratulations on your little award. It must be quite overwhelming to be thrust into this world so suddenly. The condescension was subtle but unmistakable. Zoe felt her defenses rising, but she remembered Dominic's warning. Don't engage. Thank you, Zoe said with forced politeness. It's been an incredible opportunity. I'm sure it has, Victoria replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. She turned to Dominic, placing a familiar hand on his arm. Darling, we need to talk about the board meeting next week. There are concerns about your new investments. The way she said, investments, made it clear she was talking about Zoe. My investments are performing exactly as projected, Dominic said, not moving his arm but making no effort to encourage Victoria's touch. And Chen and Associates isn't up for discussion at the board meeting. Everything is up for discussion when you're using company funds to bankroll your new girlfriend's vanity project, Victoria said, her voice sharp. The accusation hung in the air, loud enough for nearby guests to overhear. Zoe felt her face flush with humiliation and rage. Before she could respond, Dominic stepped between her and Victoria, his posture radiating cold fury. Careful, Victoria, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You're crossing a line. Am I? Victoria challenged. Or am I just saying what everyone here is thinking? That you've invested a fortune in an inexperienced architect because you're thinking with something other than your business sense. Dominic's jaw clenched, and for a moment Zoe thought he might actually lose his composure. But before he could respond, she found her own voice. Ms. Ashford, Zoe said, stepping around Dominic to face Victoria directly. I appreciate your concern about Mr. Kane's investments, but Chen and Associates secured 3 major commissions in the 2 weeks since its founding. Our projected revenue for the first year is $4.7 million. That's a 340% return on Mr. Kane's initial investment. So maybe the question isn't whether he's thinking with his business sense. Maybe the question is why you're so threatened by a successful female architect that you need to reduce her accomplishments to sleeping with the boss. The words came out clear and sharp, and the small crowd that had gathered around them gasped. Victoria's perfect composure cracked, her face flushing red. Are you insolent? We're done here, Dominic interrupted, taking Zoe's hand. Enjoy the party, Victoria. He led Zoe away through the crowd, his hand gripping hers tightly. They didn't stop until they reached the museum's rooftop terrace, which was mercifully empty. The city stretched out below them, a sea of lights that made the confrontation downstairs feel very far away. I'm sorry, Zoe said immediately, pulling her hand from his. I shouldn't have engaged. You told me not to engage, and I... That was perfect, Dominic interrupted, turning to face her. His eyes were blazing, but not with anger, with something else, something that made her pulse race. You defended yourself, you defended your firm, you put her in her place with facts and professionalism. That was, he trailed off, taking a step closer. That was the most impressive thing I've ever seen. They were standing very close now, close enough that Zoe could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cool night air. I meant what I said down there, Zoe whispered. About the revenue projections, Chen and Associates is going to be a success with or without your help. I know, Dominic said, his voice rough. That's why I invested in you. Not because of your design skills, though those are extraordinary, but because you have something I lost a long time ago. What's that? The courage to believe that what you do matters more than what it costs. Zoe's breath caught. They were standing so close now that if she just lifted onto her toes, their lips would touch. She could see that Dominic was thinking the same thing, his gaze dropping to her mouth. This was a mistake, a terrible idea that would complicate everything. They had a contract, a professional arrangement, 3 months and 6 events, and then they would part ways as colleagues. But in that moment, with the city lights glittering around them and Dominic looking at her like, she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Zoe didn't care about the contract. She rose onto her toes, and Dominic met her halfway. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both testing the waters. But then Dominic's hand came up to cup her face, and Zoe's fingers tangled in his hair, and suddenly there was nothing tentative about it. It was desperate and fierce and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "That was a terrible idea," he whispered. "The worst," Zoe agreed. "We have a contract." "We do." "This complicates everything." "It does." Neither of them moved. And then Dominic kissed her again, and Zoe forgot every single reason why this was a bad idea. Below them in the gala, Victoria Ashford watched through the glass doors leading to the terrace, her phone pressed to her ear, her expression cold and calculating. "Yes, I see them," she said to the person on the other end. "No, trust me. This is better than we planned. She's not just a distraction anymore. She's a weakness, and I know exactly how to exploit it." The kiss changed everything and nothing. For the next 2 weeks, Zoe and Dominic maintained a careful professional distance. They had meetings about the Bennett Tower construction timeline. They reviewed contracts for Chen and Associates' new commissions. They exchanged polite, business-like emails. They did not talk about the kiss, but the memory of it hung between them like a ghost, present in every lingering glance, every accidental touch, every moment when they found themselves alone in a room and had to actively resist the urge to close the distance between them. Zoe threw herself into work, spending 18-hour days at her new office, a beautiful space Dominic had secured in a renovated warehouse in Dumbo. The Bennett Tower construction was scheduled to break ground in 6 weeks, and there were 1,000 details to finalize. Maya was hiring staff, and Chen and Associates was growing faster than Zoe had ever imagined possible. But at night, alone in her apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Dominic had kissed her, the way he'd looked at her like she was precious, dangerous. The second event came faster than she expected. A charity polo match in the Hamptons, followed by a dinner on the estate of one of Dominic's major investors. It was the kind of old money event Zoe had never imagined attending, where people casually discussed their vacation homes in Tuscany and their children's Ivy League acceptances. Dominic picked her up in a town car, and the moment she slid into the back seat next to him, the tension was palpable. "How have you been?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Busy," Zoe replied, not looking at him. "The Austin project is moving forward, and I picked up 2 more residential commissions this week. Chen and Associates is officially profitable." "That's excellent news." "It is." Silence, awkward, heavy silence that had never existed between them before. "Zoe," Dominic started, but she cut him off. "We don't have to talk about it," she said quickly. "The kiss, it happened, it was a mistake. We move forward professionally. That's what the contract says." "Right," Dominic said, his voice flat. "The contract." The polo match was a blur of sun hats and champagne. Zoe smiled and made small talk and pretended not to notice the way Victoria Ashford was watching them from across the field, her expression calculating. At dinner, she was seated next to a distinguished. 3 months after the Bennett Tower groundbreaking, Zoe was working late at her office when Maya burst through the door, eyes wide with barely contained panic. "We have a problem," Maya announced, waving her phone. "A big one." Zoe looked up from her drafting table, where she'd been refining the designs for a new museum commission in San Francisco. "How big?" "The Tokyo Big. An international development consortium wants Chen and Associates to design their flagship sustainable city project, Big. This could make us one of the top 10 architecture firms in the world, Big." Zoe's heart stopped. "Tokyo, Maya, that's impossible. We're not big enough for something like that." "Apparently they don't think so." Maya pulled up the email on her tablet. "Nakamura Development Corporation. They're planning a $15 billion eco-city on reclaimed land outside Tokyo. Residential, commercial, cultural spaces, the whole thing. And they want you to lead the design team." Zoe read the email 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. But the words didn't change. They wanted Chen and Associates. They wanted her vision. And they wanted her to relocate to Tokyo for 18 months to oversee the project. 18 months, Zoe whispered, the reality sinking in. "In Tokyo." "There's more," Maya said carefully. "They want an answer by Friday, and they want you to come present your preliminary concepts in person next week." Zoe sank into her chair, her mind racing. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of project that could define a generation of architects. But it was also on the other side of the world, for a year and a half, right when she and Dominic had finally figured out how to make their relationship work. "What are you going to do?" Maya asked softly. "I don't know," Zoe admitted. "I need to talk to Dominic." She found him at his penthouse that evening, working from his home office with the city spread out behind him like a glittering carpet. He looked up when she entered, his face immediately shifting from professional focus to warm welcome. "Hey," he said, standing to greet her. "I wasn't expecting you tonight. Everything okay?" "I need to tell you something," Zoe said, and proceeded to explain the Tokyo opportunity. Dominic listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city. "That's incredible, Zoe," he finally said. "It's exactly the kind of project you've been dreaming about." "It is," she agreed. "But it's also 18 months in Tokyo, away from everything we've built here, away from you." "We could make it work," Dominic said, but she heard the strain in his voice. "Long distance, video calls, I could visit." "Dominic," Zoe crossed the room and took his hands. "Be honest with me. Could we really survive 18 months apart, right now when we're still figuring out what this is?" He looked at her and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. The businessman who understood the importance of career opportunities. The man who had fallen in love with her ambition and drive. And the person who didn't want to lose her. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. "But I do know that I won't be the reason you give up your dream. If you want to go to Tokyo, I'll support you, even if it kills me." Zoe felt tears prick her eyes. "What if I don't want to choose? What if I want both?" "Then we figure it out," Dominic said, pulling her close. "But Zoe, you have to know, if you turn this down because of me, you'll resent me eventually. Maybe not right away, but someday you'll wonder what could have been. And I can't live with being the person who held you back." She knew he was right. She also knew that losing him would break something fundamental inside her. They stood there in the quiet of his penthouse, holding each other, both acutely aware that Friday was coming whether they were ready or not. "Come with me," Zoe said suddenly, the idea forming as she spoke. "Come to Tokyo. Kane Development could expand internationally. You've talked about it before. This could be the perfect opportunity." Dominic pulled back to look at her, surprise and something else, hope, flickering in his eyes. "You want me to move to Tokyo with you?" "I want us to do this together. As partners, as equals. You expand your business, I build mine, and we don't have to choose between career and love." She took a shaky breath. "Unless you don't want to, unless I'm being presumptuous about what this is." He silenced her with a kiss. When he pulled back, he was smiling. You're not being presumptuous, and yes, I'll come with you to Tokyo. Relief flooded through Zoe so intensely she had to sit down. Really? Really, under one condition. Dominic crossed to his desk and pulled something from the drawer. When he returned, he was holding a small velvet box. Zoe's breath caught. "This isn't how I planned to do this," Dominic said, dropping to one knee in front of her. "I had a whole elaborate thing worked out, a rooftop dinner, a string quartet, the works. But standing here looking at you, talking about building a life together on the other side of the world." He opened the box, revealing a stunning ring with a center stone that caught the light like captured fire. "It made me realize that I don't want to wait for the perfect moment. This is the perfect moment. Because you're here, and you're mine, and I don't want to spend another day not being engaged to you. Zoe Chen," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "you've challenged me, infuriated me, inspired me, and completely turned my world upside down. You made me remember why I fell in love with architecture in the first place, because when it's done right, it's not about profit or prestige. It's about creating something that matters. You matter. To me, to the world, to every life you'll touch with your designs. Marry me. Come to Tokyo with me as my fiancé. Build your dream city, and let me spend the rest of my life supporting every crazy, brilliant vision you have." Tears were streaming down Zoe's face. "You're doing this because of Tokyo, because you think it's what I need to hear too." "I'm doing this because I was going to propose next month anyway," Dominic interrupted. "The ring has been sitting in my desk for 3 weeks. Ask Maya, she helped me pick it out." Maya knew. Maya knew, your entire office knew, I think even your doorman knew. You were literally the last person to find out. He was grinning now, despite the tears in his own eyes. "So what do you say, Ms. Chen? Will you marry an arrogant billionaire who's desperately in love with you?" Zoe laughed through her tears, pulling him up so she could kiss him. Yes, you impossible man, I'll marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Dominic never did anything halfway. "We're really doing this," Zoe said, staring at the ring. "We're moving to Tokyo together." "We're doing it," Dominic confirmed. "But first, we're having that rooftop dinner with the string quartet. I already paid the deposit." Zoe burst out laughing, the sound full of joy and relief and the beginning of a new adventure. "You're ridiculous." "You're marrying ridiculous," he pointed out, kissing her again. As they stood there, newly engaged and planning an international move, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the building across the street. A woman with blonde hair and a phone pressed to her ear, her expression one of cold calculation. Victoria Ashford had returned to New York, and she had unfinished business. The engagement announcement made headlines. Architectural Digest did a feature spread. The New York Times ran a business profile about power couples redefining corporate leadership. Chen and Associates got 50 new project inquiries in a single week. But with the attention came scrutiny, and with scrutiny came Victoria. Zoe first saw her at a pre-Tokyo celebration dinner Maya had organized at a trendy Manhattan restaurant. She was in the middle of toasting her team, the 15 architects and designers who had helped make Chen and Associates a success, when she spotted the familiar blonde head at the bar. Victoria raised her champagne glass in a mock salute, her smile sharp as a blade. "Excuse me," Zoe murmured to Dominic, who was deep in conversation with one of their investors. She made her way to the bar, her heart pounding with equal parts anger and apprehension. "Hello, Zoe," Victoria said smoothly. "Congratulations on the engagement and Tokyo, quite the fairy tale you're living." "What are you doing here, Victoria?" Zoe asked, keeping her voice level. "Having a drink at a public establishment. Last I checked, that wasn't illegal." Victoria took a sip of champagne. "Although I suppose you could have me thrown out. You seem to be very good at that, throwing people out of their own companies, their own lives." "You tried to destroy Kane Development," Zoe said flatly. "And when that didn't work, you disappeared. What are you really doing here?" Victoria's smile widened. I came to offer my congratulations and to give you some advice, woman to woman. I don't want your advice. You should take it anyway. Victoria leaned closer, her voice dropping. Dominic Kane is very good at making women feel special, at making them feel like they're the exception, the one who finally broke through his walls. I felt that way once too. This isn't the same. Isn't it? Victoria interrupted. He invested in your firm. He defended you publicly. He proposed. But have you asked yourself what happens when you're in Tokyo and he's managing his empire from 7,000 miles away? How long before the distance becomes too much? How long before he finds someone new to invest in? You're projecting, Zoe said, but doubt was already creeping in. Dominic isn't you. No, he's not. He's worse because he actually believes his own good intentions. Victoria finished her champagne. But intentions don't matter when you're building an empire, Zoe. Results do. And the result is always the same. The work comes first. Always. Before Zoe could respond, Dominic appeared at her side. He saw Victoria and his expression hardened to stone. You need to leave, he said, his voice quiet but absolutely lethal. I was just congratulating your lovely fiancé, Victoria replied, standing. Tokyo is so far away, Dominic. I hope you two can handle the distance. She brushed past them, then paused. Oh, and Zoe, ask him about Singapore. She left before either of them could respond, disappearing into the Manhattan night like smoke. What was she talking about? Zoe asked, turning to Dominic. Singapore. Dominic's jaw clenched. It's nothing, ancient history. Dominic. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. 5 years ago, I was dating someone, an artist. She got a gallery opportunity in Singapore, once in a lifetime, couldn't pass it up. I told her I'd support her, that we'd make it work long distance. What happened? 6 months in, she met someone else. Someone who was actually there, physically present for her life. We tried to make it work, but the distance, he trailed off, his meaning clear. Zoe felt something cold settle in her stomach. So Victoria's point is that history will repeat itself, that Tokyo will break us. Victoria's point is to get in your head and make you doubt us, Dominic said firmly, taking her hands. Which is exactly what she's doing. Zoe, what happened in Singapore was different. That relationship was new, untested. We've been through battles together. We've chosen each other over and over. A year and a half in Tokyo isn't going to change that. But what if she's right? Zoe whispered. What if the distance is too much? What if you wake up one day and realize it's easier to be with someone who's actually there? Then I'd be an idiot, Dominic said, pulling her close. Zoe, I'm not going to lie and say long distance will be easy, but I'm also not going to let Victoria's poison convince you that we're doomed before we've even started. We'll make it work because the alternative, not having you in my life, isn't an option I'm willing to consider. Zoe wanted to believe him. She did believe him. But Victoria's words had planted a seed of doubt that she couldn't quite shake. The presentation in Tokyo was a triumph. The Nakamura Development Corporation loved Zoe's vision, a sustainable city that integrated traditional Japanese design principles with cutting-edge green technology. They signed the contract on the spot, with a timeline that meant she needed to be in Tokyo within 6 weeks. 6 weeks to relocate her entire life to the other side of the world. The return to New York was a blur of logistics, finding a Tokyo office space for Chen and Associates, satellite location, arranging work visas, deciding which team members would relocate and which would stay in New York, planning a small, intimate wedding before they left, because Zoe's mother had made it very clear that her daughter would not be living in sin in Tokyo, engaged or not. Through it all, Dominic was her rock. He handled the business side of the move with ruthless efficiency, securing office space for Kane Development's new Tokyo branch and arranging housing for both of them. He learned basic Japanese phrases. He made lists and schedules and contingency plans. But Zoe noticed something. As the departure date grew closer, Dominic became increasingly unavailable. Late meetings, emergency conference calls, sudden trips to Los Angeles, Chicago, London. "He's just overwhelmed with the logistics of the move," Maya assured her when Zoe voiced her concerns. "You're both stressed, it's normal." But 3 days before they were supposed to leave for Tokyo, Zoe was picking up the last of her belongings from Dominic's penthouse when she overheard him on a phone call in his office. "I understand the concerns," Dominic was saying, his voice tense. "But I can't postpone the Tokyo move. The contracts are signed. No, I'm aware of what's at stake. If 48 hours isn't enough time to, fine. I'll figure something out." He hung up and stood there for a moment, his head bowed, the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Dominic," Zoe said from the doorway. He spun around, surprise and something else, guilt, flashing across his face. "Zoe, I didn't hear you come in." "Who was that on the phone?" "Just business. The Tokyo transition is more complicated than anticipated." "How complicated?" Zoe pressed, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. Dominic hesitated, and in that hesitation, Zoe knew. Whatever he was about to say, it was going to change everything. "There's a problem with one of my major projects," he admitted. "A development in Brooklyn that's been in the works for 3 years. The lead investor is pulling out, and if I can't secure new financing in the next 48 hours, I'll lose everything. The land, the deposits, potentially the entire company if the bankruptcy cascades." 48 hours, Zoe repeated. "We leave for Tokyo in 72 hours. "I know. So what are you saying?" Dominic crossed to her, taking her hands. "I'm saying I need to stay in New York for another week, 2 at most. Just long enough to secure the financing and stabilize the situation. Then I'll join you in Tokyo." "A week or 2, Zoe said slowly, Victoria's words echoing in her head. "The work comes first, always." "I'll be on the next plane as soon as it's handled," Dominic promised. "This doesn't change anything, Zoe. We're still getting married this weekend. We're still doing Tokyo together. It's just a slight delay." A delay at the very beginning of what was supposed to be our adventure together. "I know how this looks." "Do you?" Zoe pulled her hands away, anger and hurt warring in her chest. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're choosing your company over us. Again, just like Victoria said you would." "That's not fair," Dominic said, his own frustration breaking through. "This isn't about choosing. This is about a crisis that could destroy everything I've built. I can't just abandon my company." "But you can abandon me." "You're not being abandoned. I'm asking for 2 weeks." 2 weeks now, then it'll be 2 more because something else comes up. Then another crisis, another emergency. And suddenly I'm building my dream city alone while you're here choosing work over marriage. "Zoe, that's not what's happening." "Isn't it?" She was crying now, furious with herself for the tears but unable to stop them. "You told me I was different, that we were partners, but at the first real test you're proving Victoria right. The work does come first." "What do you want me to do?" Dominic shouted, his control finally snapping. "Let my company collapse, throw away everything I've built? Is that what it takes to prove I love you?" "I want you to choose me," Zoe shouted back. "Not over your company, not instead of your work, but equally, as a partner, as someone whose dreams matter just as much as yours." "I am choosing you. I'm moving to Tokyo. I'm building a whole new branch of my company so I can be with you. But I can't just walk away from a crisis that could bankrupt everything I've worked for." They stood there both breathing hard, the weight of the argument pressing down on them. This was the moment, Zoe realized. The crossroads where they either found a way forward or accepted that love wasn't enough. "Then stay," Zoe said quietly, the fight draining out of her. "Handle your crisis, save your company, but I'm going to Tokyo as planned." "Zoe, I'm not saying this to punish you," she continued, her voice steady despite the tears. I'm saying this because if I wait for you to be ready, I might be waiting forever. My team is already in Tokyo. My clients are expecting me, and I need to know that I can do this on my own without you swooping in to save me or support me or whatever you think your role is. So what does this mean for us? I don't know, Zoe admitted. But I think we both need to figure out if we can be partners when we're apart. If this only works when we're in the same city, in the same room, then maybe Victoria was right. Maybe the work does always come first, for both of us. She turned to leave, but Dominic caught her arm. Don't do this, don't walk away. I'm not walking away, Zoe said, looking back at him with tear-filled eyes. I'm giving us space to figure out what we really want. If you can save your company and still want to come to Tokyo, I'll be there. If you realize that staying in New York is what you need, I'll understand. But I'm not going to put my life on hold waiting for you to decide. She pulled free and walked out, leaving Dominic standing in the middle of his penthouse, the engagement ring on her finger catching the light like a promise neither of them knew if they could keep. Zoe landed in Tokyo on a gray Monday morning, jet-lagged and heartbroken. The wedding hadn't happened. They'd postponed it, citing the business crisis, but everyone knew what it really meant. Their relationship was on pause, suspended in uncertainty while they both tried to figure out what came next. Maya met her at the airport, taking one look at her face and pulling her into a fierce hug. "He's an idiot," Maya said bluntly. "He's building an empire," Zoe replied tiredly. "I knew that going in." "So are you, but you're here doing the work. Where's he?" Zoe didn't have an answer to that. The Tokyo office was stunning. A converted industrial space in Shibuya with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the neon chaos of the city. Her team had already set up their drafting tables, and preliminary models of the Eco-City project filled the main workspace. Throwing herself into work was easy. Zoe spent 16-hour days refining designs, meeting with engineers, navigating the complexities of Japanese building codes and cultural considerations. The Nakamura project was everything she dreamed of: ambitious, innovative, meaningful. But at night, alone in her temporary apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about Dominic. He called every day, texted constantly, sent flowers to her office with notes that said, "I'm sorry and I miss you and I'm working on it." But he didn't get on a plane, and with each passing day, the gap between them grew wider. 2 weeks became 3. 3 became 4. The Brooklyn project was stabilized, but now there were new issues. A lawsuit from the former investor, zoning complications, potential fraud allegations that needed to be handled with extreme delicacy. "How long?" Zoe asked during one of their nightly video calls. "How long until you can actually leave?" Dominic looked exhausted, his office behind him dark except for his desk lamp. "I don't know. My lawyers are saying 6 weeks minimum, maybe 8. 2 months, Zoe said, the number landing like a stone. "We've already been apart for a month, and you're telling me it'll be 2 more. "I'm doing everything I can." "Are you?" Zoe interrupted. "Or are you doing what you've always done, letting work consume you because it's easier than dealing with the messy, complicated reality of a relationship?" "That's not fair." "None of this is fair." Zoe's voice rose, months of frustration finally boiling over. "I moved to the other side of the world for us, Dominic. I'm building my dream city, yes, but I'm doing it alone. And you're still in New York, fighting the same battles you've been fighting for a decade." "What do you want me to say?" Dominic shot back. "That I'm a failure at this. That I don't know how to balance love and work. I do. I've never known how. Every relationship I've ever had has ended because I couldn't figure out how to be both a CEO and a partner." "Then maybe you need to figure out which one matters more." The words hung in the air between them, brutal and honest. Dominic stared at her through the screen, his expression one of pure agony. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "Doesn't that count for anything?" Love isn't enough if we can't figure out how to actually be together, Zoe replied, tears streaming down her face. I need more than daily phone calls and apology flowers. I need a partner who shows up. I'm trying. I know, but trying isn't the same as succeeding, and I can't keep waiting for you to get it right. She ended the call before she could see his response, then sat in her empty Tokyo apartment and cried until she had no tears left. 2 weeks later, Zoe was presenting the first phase designs to the Nakamura board when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Maya. Turn on the news. Now. Zoe excused herself, stepping out of the conference room to pull up a news site on her phone. The headline made her heart stop. Kane Development CEO announces immediate transition. Dominic Kane steps down as day-to-day leader, appoints new CEO. She clicked on the article with shaking hands. In a surprise announcement this morning, Dominic Kane revealed that he will be stepping back from daily operations of Kane Development to focus on long-term strategic vision and international expansion. Current COO Marcus Reeves will assume the role of CEO effective immediately. I built this company to create meaningful architectural projects, Kane stated at a hastily called press conference. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of why I started to build things that matter, with people who matter. I can't do that from behind a desk in New York when the most important project of my career is in Tokyo. Kane confirmed he will be relocating to Tokyo to oversee Kane Development's Asia expansion, and will maintain his role as chairman of the board, while Reeves handles day-to-day operations. Zoe read the article 3 times, her mind reeling. Dominic had stepped down. After everything he'd built, every battle he'd fought to maintain control, he was handing over the reins of his company. For her. Her phone rang. Dominic. Did you see? He asked without preamble, his voice rough with exhaustion and something else, liberation. You stepped down, Zoe said, still trying to process it. You actually did it. I should have done it 2 months ago. Hell, I should have done it the moment you challenged me about work-life balance. She could hear the smile in his voice despite the exhaustion. Turns out you were right. I was hiding behind work because it was safe and predictable, but safe and predictable isn't what I want anymore. Dominic. I'm at Narita Airport, he interrupted. My plane landed 20 minutes ago. I wanted to call you first before I just showed up because I know you asked for space and I've been terrible at respecting boundaries. But Zoe, I'm done waiting. I'm done letting work come first. I'm done choosing safe over important. You're important. This is important, and I'm here if you'll have me. Zoe couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down her face. Happy tears this time, relief and joy, and the overwhelming realization that he'd actually done it. Zoe, say something. You're killing me here. What about the Brooklyn project? She managed to ask. Resolved. The new CEO is handling it. What about the fraud allegations? My lawyers are dealing with it. What about? What about us? Zoe interrupted. What happens when the next crisis hits, when Kane Development needs you and you're here with me? Then we figure it out together, Dominic said. As partners, I'm not saying I'll be perfect at this. I'm probably going to mess up and work too much and forget that I don't have to solve every problem myself. But I want to mess up with you in Tokyo while we're both building our dreams. Where are you right now? Zoe asked, already grabbing her coat. Terminal 2 arrivals. Why? Because I'm coming to get you, you impossible man. And then we're going to the Tokyo Metropolitan Government Building and getting married, like we should have done 3 months ago. She could hear the smile in his voice. Now, you want to get married right now. Right now, before either of us can overthink it or before another crisis hits. We'll do a proper wedding later with our families and friends. But right now, I just want to be married to you. I love you, Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. God, I love you so much. I love you too. Now stay where you are. I'm on my way. Zoe burst back into the conference room where the Nakamura board was waiting with confused expressions. "I'm so sorry," she announced, grabbing her bag. "There's an emergency I need to handle. Maya will present the rest of the designs. I'll be back in." She paused, doing mental calculations. 3 hours, maybe 4. "Ms. Chen," Mr. Nakamura said, standing, "is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect," Zoe replied, grinning through her tears. "I'm going to marry a billionaire, and then we're going to build you the most incredible, sustainable city the world has ever seen." She ran. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government Building's marriage registration office was not romantic. It was fluorescent-lit and bureaucratic, smelling faintly of paper and air conditioning. But standing there, filling out forms with Dominic beside her, rumpled from his flight, still in his travel clothes, with 2 hours of stubble and eyes bright with love, Zoe thought it was the most beautiful place in the world. Maya and 2 of her Tokyo team members served as witnesses. The ceremony, such as it was, took 15 minutes and was conducted entirely in Japanese, which neither Zoe nor Dominic spoke fluently. But when the official handed them their marriage certificate and said something that the translator confirmed was, "You are now legally married," Dominic pulled Zoe into a kiss that made the fluorescent lights seem like stars. "We did it," Zoe whispered against his lips. "We're actually married." "We did it," Dominic confirmed. "And now we get to spend the rest of our lives figuring out how to make this work." "Together," Zoe said. "Together," he agreed. Maya pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of them. Sweaty, jet-lagged, crying, laughing, absolutely ridiculous and completely happy. "This is going on Instagram," Maya announced. "The architecture world needs to know that Zoe Chen just married her billionaire and is about to change the world. Also that she married him in the Tokyo government office wearing jeans and a blazer," Zoe added, looking down at her decidedly unbridal outfit. "It's perfect," Dominic said, kissing her again. "You're perfect." They celebrated with conveyor belt sushi and cheap steak, because Dominic's apartment wasn't ready and Zoe's was too small for both of them, and neither wanted to waste time finding a fancy restaurant when they could be together, finally, after 3 months of painful separation. "What happens now?" Zoe asked as they stumbled back to her apartment sometime after midnight, jet-lagged and sake-drunk and happier than either of them had been in months. "Now we build," Dominic said. "Your eco-city, my Asia expansion, our life." "In that order." "In whatever order makes sense at the time," he replied, pulling her close. "As long as we're doing it together." Zoe kissed him, tasting sake and promise and the future they were going to build brick by brick, design by design, day by day. "Together," she agreed. And for the first time since this crazy journey had started, since the day she'd called an arrogant billionaire out in a conference room and not known he owned her future, Zoe felt completely, perfectly certain that they were going to make it. Not because it would be easy, but because it mattered. And some things were worth fighting for. 3 years later, the Nakamura Eco-City opened to international acclaim. It won the Pritzker Prize. It was featured in documentaries. It became the model for sustainable urban development worldwide, proof that beauty and functionality and environmental responsibility could coexist in perfect harmony. Chen and Associates grew to 150 employees across 4 international offices. Zoe became one of the most sought-after architects in the world, with a 5-year waiting list for commissions. Kane Development's Asia division became its most profitable arm, pioneering new construction techniques and sustainable building practices that revolutionized the industry. And Dominic and Zoe learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, how to be married while building empires. There were fights about work-life balance. There were late nights and missed dinners and moments when they both questioned whether they could really do both. But there were also mornings in their Tokyo apartment, drinking coffee and sketching designs on napkins. There were site visits where they walked through buildings they'd created together, their hands intertwined. There were nights when they fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from work but content in the knowledge that they were doing something meaningful. On their third anniversary, Dominic took Zoe back to the rooftop of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, the place where they'd first kissed. 3 years ago, Dominic said, standing at the edge of the terrace with the city spread out behind him, you called me arrogant in a conference room and changed my entire life. I didn't know you owned the company, Zoe reminded him, smiling at the memory. Best mistake you ever made, Dominic replied, pulling her close, because it led us here to Bennett Tower. He pointed across the skyline to the gleaming structure that had been her first major design. To Tokyo, to everything we've built together. No regrets, Zoe asked. A few, Dominic admitted. I wish I'd stepped down as CEO sooner. I wish I'd gotten on that plane to Tokyo immediately instead of waiting 3 months. I wish I'd been braver about choosing you from the very beginning. But you did choose me, Zoe said, rising on her toes to kiss him. Eventually, and that's what matters. I choose you, Dominic corrected. Present tense, every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Good, Zoe said, because I have news. Though, she pulled out a folder from her bag and handed it to him. Inside was an ultrasound photo and a positive pregnancy test. Dominic stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at her, his eyes shining with tears. We're having a baby. We're having a baby, Zoe confirmed. Due in 6 months, right in the middle of the Dubai project launch and your Singapore acquisition. Terrible timing, really. Dominic laughed, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around. Perfect timing, the best timing. You say that now, Zoe teased. Wait until I'm 8 months pregnant and refusing to slow down on the Dubai skyscraper design. I can't wait, Dominic said, and he meant it. Because this was their life now, beautiful and chaotic and imperfect and absolutely perfect. They'd learned that having it all didn't mean never struggling. It meant choosing each other through the struggle. It meant building something together that was stronger than either of them could have created alone. As the sun set over New York, painting the Bennett Tower in gold, Zoe rested her head on Dominic's shoulder and thought about the journey that had brought them here. She'd called a billionaire arrogant and not known he owned her job. That confrontation could have destroyed her. Instead, it had become the foundation of everything.